Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Shrinvatam Swakata Krishna Punyashravana Kirtana Hridayantasto hi abhadrani vidunoti suhritsadam Nashtaprayesha Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Uttama Shloke Bhaktir. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 23, titled Maharaj Prithu's Going Back Home, text 19 and text 20. Text 19. Archirnama Maharajni Tatpatni Anugata Vanam Sukumari Atad Arpacha Yatpadvyam Sparshanam Bhuvaha Archirnama Maharajni Tatpatni Anugata Vanam Sukumari Atad Arpacha Yatpadbhyam Sparshanam Bhuvaha. Translation and purport by His Divine Srila Prabhupada, Sri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. The queen, the wife of Prithu Maharaj, whose name was Archi, followed her husband into the forest. Since she was a queen, her body was very delicate. Although she did not deserve to live in the forest, she voluntarily touched her lotus feet to the ground. Report. Because Prithu Maharaj's wife was a queen and also daughter of a king, she never experienced walking on the ground, for queens used to never come out of the palace. They certainly never went to the forest and tolerated all the difficulties of living in the wilderness. In Vedic civilization, there are hundreds of similar examples of such renunciation on the part of queens and dedication to husband. The goddess of fortune, Mother Sita, followed her husband, Ramachandra, when he went to the forest. Lord Ramachandra went to the forest in compliance with the order of his father, Maharaj Dasharatha. But Mother Sita was not so ordered. Nonetheless, she voluntarily accepted the path of her husband. Similarly, Gandhari, the wife of King Dhritarashtra, also followed her husband into the forest. Being the wives of great personalities like Prithu, Lord Ramachandra, and Dhritarashtra, these were ideal chaste women. Such queens also instructed the general people by showing them how to become a chaste wife and follow the husband in every stage of life. When the husband is king, she sits beside him as a queen, and when he goes to the forest, she also follows, despite having to tolerate all kinds of difficulties in living in the forest. Therefore, it is said here, Atat Araha, that although she did not want to touch her feet to the ground, she nonetheless accepted all difficulties when she went to the forest with her husband. Text number 20. अतीव भर्तुर्व्रतधर्मनिष्ठया शुश्रूषयाचार्षदेहयात्रया नाविन्दतार्तिं परिकर्षितापि च प्रेयक्षरास्पर्शनमाननिर्वृति अतीव भर्तुर्व्रतधर्मनिष्ठया शुश्रूषयाचार्षदेहयात्रया नाविन्दतार्तिं परिकर्षितापि सा प्रेयास्पर स्पर्शनमाननिर्वृति. Translation of Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Although she was not accustomed to such difficulties, Queen Archi followed her husband in the regulative principles of living in the forest like great sages. She lay down on the ground and ate only fruits, flowers, and leaves, and because she was not fit for these activities, she became frail and thin. Yet, because of the pleasure she derived in serving her husband, she did not feel any difficulties. Purport. The words Bhartur, Vrata, Dharma, Nishtaya indicate that a woman's duty or religious principle is to serve her husband in all conditions. In Vedic civilization, a man is taught from the beginning of his life to become a brahmachari, then an ideal grihastha, then vanaprastha, then sannyasi. And the wife is taught just to follow the husband strictly in all conditions of life. After the period of brahmacharya, a man accepts a householder's life, and the woman is also taught by her parents to be a chaste wife. Thus, when a girl and a boy are united, both are trained for a life dedicated to a higher purpose. The boy is trained to execute his duty in accordance with the higher purpose of life, and the girl is trained to follow him. The chaste wife's duty is to keep her husband pleased in householder life in all respects. And when the husband retires from the family life, she is to go to the forest and adopt the life of Vanaprastha or Vanavasi. At that time, the wife is to follow her husband and take care of him, just as she took care of him in householder life. But when the husband takes the renounced order of life, namely sannyasa, the wife is to return home and become a saintly woman, setting an example for her children and daughters-in-law, and showing them how to live a life of austerity. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas, his wife Vishnu Priya Devi, although only 16 years old, also took the vow of austerities due to her husband's leaving home. She chanted her beads, and after finishing one round, she collected one grain of rice. In this way, as many rounds as she chanted, she would receive the same number of rice grains and then cook them and so take prasada. This is called austerity. Even today in India, widows or women whose husbands have taken sannyas follow the principles of austerity, even though they live with their children. Prithu Maharaj's wife Archie was steadily determined to execute the duty of a wife, and while her husband was in the forest, she followed him in eating only fruits and leaves and lying down on the ground. Since a woman's body is considerably more delicate than a man's, Queen Archie became very frail and thin, parikarshita. When one engages in austerities, his body generally becomes lean and thin. Becoming fat is not a very good qualification in spiritual life because a person who is engaged in spiritual life must reduce the comforts of the body, namely eating, sleeping, and mating, to a minimum. Although Queen Archie became very thin from living in the forest according to the regulatory principles, she was not unhappy, for she was enjoying the honor of serving her great husband. End of purport. नमो ओम विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमदे भक्ति वेदांत स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वते देवी गौरवाणी निर्धारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशधारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे हरे Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I humbly seek the blessings of all assembled Vaishnavas. Thank you for the opportunity to verify myself by summarizing from Srimad Bhagavatam today. So, please forgive if I add my own interpretation to the summary. So, again, we are in this chapter titled Maharaj Prithu's Going Back Home, and we are seeing how Maharaj Prithu, after finishing his kingly duties, which he did for dharma, for the Vedic injunctions, and then he now also is moving on to the next stage where he went to the forest and is preparing to leave this body. And we are seeing how Queen Archie, who is equally glorious, is following, and she is following her dharma of following the husband and serving him in all the different situations, especially even now when he is alone in the forest life. So we see how Srimad Bhagavatam is uh, explaining the glories of the Supreme Lord and is explaining the glories of great devotees, such as like Prithu Maharaj. And as also mentioned by Prabhupada in the purport, that um, King Archie is setting an example. So she necessarily, she doesn't have to follow, she being a queen, she doesn't have to follow Prithu Maharaj, but she is showing how an ideal chaste woman should be. And we also see Prabhupada compare Queen Archie to other mothers such as like Sita and Gandhari, who were also not forced to follow their husbands, but then they voluntarily did it because they were following dharma. The one message that comes out here is that when people follow the Vedic culture, then they are following the path of dharma. And when one follows the path of dharma, then dharma protects that same dharma protects them in their lives and make sure that they get to an elevated state. So here we see that um, the culture of these great personalities are very Vedic oriented. And culture, in layman terms, means like it's the daily life of people, like how one leads their daily life. And if that is being directed by, or if that is based on the Vedic injunctions and authorized shastras, then that's the best way to live one's life. And here we see how also Srimad Bhagavatam talks about the grahastha life and then how to leave one's body. So Bhagavatam is not restricted to uh, brahmachari life or sannyasa life. It also talks about how grahastha life should be led. So it's this whole encompassing glorious scripture that gives us examples of different people in different stages of life, and we can glean life lessons from every part of Srimad Bhagavatam. So again, it's a glorious scripture giving us how to lead life. So again, as we see here, Prabhupada in the purports talks about how tapasya is very, very important. Um, Prabhupada says that despite having to tolerate all kinds of difficulties living in the forest, she did do that because that was her dharma. Therefore, it is said here that although she did not want to touch her feet to the ground, she nonetheless accepted all difficulties when she went to the forest with her husband. And even yesterday in the ASU program, like Mukundata Prabhu was mentioning, how it's so glorious to get this human form. And the greatest fear that we should have is to lose this form and to lose valuable time in this human form. Because anyway, in this material world, everyone is suffering some way or the other. And why not take up to this bhakti process, although it might be suffering at an external level. Like initially, it might seem like too many austerities to follow and very difficult paths to follow. But then, I mean, everyone has to do some type of tapasya. So it's very well appropriate to take up this spiritual tapasya because it's only going to be rewarding in the end of the day. So that the in next verse, text number 20, we see how again the verse talks about Achi strictly following the regulative principles um, of living in the forest like great sages. So here we see how Prabhupada is again expanding on the chaste wife character. That when people get married, then they have to follow the dharma of the marriage. And one has to, or both have to be very, very caring of each other, and then they have to work together to go back home, back to Godhead. Again, this grihastha life is a blessing in the sense that if husband and wife are working towards the same goal of pleasing the Supreme Lord, then that's the best combination that can help generations to come afterwards. And also, Prabhupada talks about how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu left early, but then his wife Vishnupriya Devi, although very young, again took up the austerity to um, be very, very spiritual. She chanted and very meagerly ate, and then led her life of pure austerity. So the determination that these women have in the process of following dharma in serving their husband is very much appreciated, and we can also extend this to our determination to our guru and the parampara. As Sankarshan Adhikari Maharaj was mentioning that this should be a lesson for all the disciples to follow Guru's instructions. I mean, the dharma of a disciple is to strictly follow the instructions of a guru. And the guru gives instructions such as um, remembering Krishna, to read spiritual books such as Srila Prabhupada's, and then also chant attentively and associate. So we should be taking all these instructions very seriously and then trying to do them to our best of our ability. That's the way we can be very obedient and follow the dharma of the guru, shishya, disciple. And then finally, in the purport of verse 20, Prabhupada mentions, also that's mentioned in the verse, that although Queen Arshi became very thin and living in the forest and following all the regulated principles, she was still not unhappy, but rather she was enjoying the honor of serving her great husband. So that's again very applicable to other messages of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, where this spiritual life is like totally opposite with the material life, where materially everything looks enjoyable temporarily, but then in the long run it doesn't help. But rather, spirituality initially it may seem, or externally it may seem very difficult, but then in the long run it's the best thing to do for the soul. And again, the basic of all Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita, the basic of Krishna consciousness or spirituality is that we are not the body, but rather the soul. And Mukundatta Prabhu again was giving a nice example yesterday that, I mean, the one very obvious or common sense kind of analogy we can think about is that we know medically that every cell in our body changes every 7 years. But we remember so many things like from 15 years ago, 10 years ago, more than the 7 year cell changing time frame. So this tells us that we are beyond the body and the cells. But it's still very, very hard for many people to understand this. And again, we should be very, very serious in not wasting this human life. And the best way to use this human life is to chant holy names of the Lord and try to remember the holy names and the Lord's glories all the time, because that's the only thing that can save us. And again, yesterday Prabhu was saying that he really got inspired into chanting because 20, 30 years, oh no, like 50 years ago, he saw this banner in one of the temples saying, chant the Hare Krishna mantra. And then it also said in the end, while you can. So this while you can is something that is very, very important, because we have able body, we have like able mind now. And if we don't chant now and then utilize this opportunity, then it will be very, very hard later when we don't have much control of the different senses of the body. So again, the chant while you can is very, very inspiring. And Prabhu mentioned it was inspiring for me also. And then finally, although this is a material world and we always hear about how this is like the place of misery, but we can still relatively live peacefully in this material world if we can again chant Krishna's holy names and have the faith in Krishna. And if we do so, then Krishna will never let us go, because he's our best friend, he's our best well-wisher. And as long as we try to follow the instructions coming from Krishna through the parampara, then we will definitely be protected and still can relatively live peacefully in this material world. And again, we're so fortunate that we have received this opportunity of reading Srimad Bhagavatam every day, being exposed to Srila Prabhupada's books and philosophy, and having great association in here. And we should be so fortunate, and we should always remember how fortunate we are, and then try to continue this process to our best of our capability. That's the message kind of I get from this section. So with that,